I tell you, I have a fantastically powerful tool, which is music. And I bring music into the room. I get them to sing and I tell them about music and I play it on the piano. And gradually their shackles fall off and their emotional pores open, and they cannot resist the power of Chopin and of Mozart and of Beethoven and of that great music. And suddenly they're open-hearted, they're singing with each other, and they realize that a power is opening up in themselves, which they do not normally get access to. And that is the gift that we artists have to give to the business world. We always think of the business world as being important for giving money, but money is very nice. But what we give, which is essentially the art of possibility, the idea that we are connected, inclusive, and that we are living in contribution. That is what we do. And that is such a powerful message and so beautiful and opens people up in ways that so often they don't suspect. They become so much more lovely.
Hello, a very warm welcome to Cambridge Forum, coming to you live via Zoom. I'm Mary Stack, the Executive Director, and today we are very thrilled to welcome a wonderfully talented, generous spirit to the programme, Benjamin Zander. Ben is not just a world-renowned conductor, currently with the Boston Philharmonic and Boston Philharmonic Youth Orchestras. He's also an inspirational teacher and an author who embodies his ethos, which is to dwell in the realm of possibility, but to do it passionately. In 2000, Ben co-authored a book with his then wife, Roz, entitled The Art of Possibility. And he says quite unabashedly that this practice has transformed both his personal and his professional life. We all have to navigate hardship and challenges, but Ben firmly believes that everyday miracles happen despite the catastrophes that life throws at us. And to quote him from the book, in the face of difficulty, we can despair, we can get angry, or choose possibility. So welcome aboard, Ben.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be with you. And of course, we have a fair share of difficulties right now. There isn't anybody who isn't facing some terrible difficulties, and some people are overwhelmed by the difficulties. So the question is, when we put that forward, that idea that you either get angry or you get into despair or you choose possibility, what does that really mean? Possibility is a way of looking at the world. It's a way, it's an attitude. It's a way of telling stories about the world that enliven and bring joy, and most of all, that open up opportunities to take action and to speak in a way that enlivens other people. And that choice is always there. Whatever the circumstances, we always have that opportunity. Every time we open our mouth, actually, we can choose whether to speak in what we call the downward spiral, which is that world of despair and anger and competition and winning and losing and fear, or whether we speak in possibility, radiating possibility, as we call it, for those who have eyes to see. We have a design, that's the radiating possibility design with arrows going out in all directions. And the other, the downward spiral, is the downward arrow. And we always have that choice. There's a story which I love to tell. I never get tired because it's such a beautiful, clear statement of that. The two shoe salesmen who visit Africa in the 1900s to see if they can sell shoes, each sent a telegram back to Manchester, and one of them reads, "Situation hopeless, stop. They don't wear shoes." The other one says, "Glorious opportunity. They don't have any shoes yet." Now, one of them obviously is speaking in the downward spiral and has probably already bought a ticket to go home. And the other sees glorious opportunity, and it affects his voice, his body language, his facial expression, his arms, his energy, everything is affected, excited, energized, and he's probably booked a hotel room for the next month so he can start getting going selling shoes. So those are two choices. They're looking at the same thing. It's not as if one is looking at a different circumstance. So the circumstances are not what's important. What's important is what we say about it and what we do about it. And we have infinite examples of that, extraordinary acts of bravery and imagination and creativity all around us during this terrible time. And nobody should pretend that we haven't been through one of the worst times in our history, both politically and also medically. And yet it's brought out the creativity and the imagination and the generosity and love of people to a degree that we are very moved by. My mother always used to say, as an immigrant to England, that the best time was the wartime in England, because people were so generous and so kind and so supportive of each other. It brought out all the best. She always said that was the best time. So the question is how we can do that. And I want to tell you, if I may, one little personal story, because it means a great deal to me and it inspired me very much. And that was my father, who was an immigrant from Nazi Germany as a Jewish man, and he left Germany and left everything. He lost his money, his home, his language, his job, everything, and came to England. And having lost his mother and 8 other members in the concentration camps, and he came to England to build a life with his new family. But then he was interned when France was overrun by the Germans. The English immediately took all the German people and put them in an internment camp. And there he was with 2,000 men, equally distressed and upset, and having had such horrific experiences. And he looked around and he said, there are a lot of intelligent people here. We should have a university. And so he started with a friend. They started a series of classes, and eventually they were running 46 classes a week in that camp, without any books, no pencil, no paper, no chalk, no blackboard, just people talking to each other. Now, that's a beautiful example of possibility, because it's actually doing something. It's not pretending things are great. That's positive thinking. That's part of the downward spiral. You're pretending things are great when you know they're really shitty. And that's why positive thinkers are so annoying. but somebody who does possibility, who creates something new, who says something which makes a difference, that's a discipline worth mastering. And so this is a discipline, because every time something happens or we experience something, we have a choice whether we're going to go down that downward spiral, which comes automatically. We don't have to think about it. Anger or disappointment or jealousy or all those emotions which come in the downward spiral. And the competitiveness, even winning and losing and success and failure, they're all part of the downward spiral. So the world of possibility is a world of inclusion and contribution and engagement and love, and a place where human beings function together and learn together and create together. So we've been able to do that to an amazing degree, actually, during this very difficult time. And I didn't leave my house for nearly 2 years, but nevertheless, except to go into hospital because I had an accident. So that was another story. But some amazing things happened during this time. Some of the best things, actually, that have happened in my life have happened in the last 18 months. And we've now emerged, and the orchestras have both emerged and are playing fantastically. I would actually say better than before. And I think there's a reason for that, if I may elaborate a little bit on. The Boston Philharmonic is a professional orchestra, and therefore, like all other professional orchestras, had to be silent. And it was silent for nearly 2 years. And that was a devastating blow, not only for the musicians who love to play and need to play, but also financially. And so there was very little we could do to help that situation because there were no concert halls open. And so what we did in that case was we made sure that all the supporters of the orchestra gave as much money to the orchestra when we were silent as when we were making music. And what I said to the donors is we love them and applaud them when they're playing. We should also support them when they're not. And they did, they rallied, and we raised enough money to support all the ones who needed it in the orchestra. So that was a huge boon. The result of that is a depth of gratitude, which is palpable. I feel it, I see it on the faces, I see it on the bodies of the players when they play. The first concert we gave was Bruckner's Eighth Symphony, one of the greatest prayers of thanksgiving ever created by mankind. And they poured their hearts into that music with every ounce of their being. And the sounds that poured out in Symphony Hall when finally they came together, I have to say, I don't think it could have been as great if we hadn't been through that struggle. What happened with the other orchestra is even more fascinating, if I may say. We gave the last concert in Symphony Hall on March the 12th. Mm-hmm. That, you remember, was the day before everything closed down. And we got a message from the governor's office saying we could give the concert, but we were not allowed to have an audience. Only the parents who brought their children, because this is the youth orchestra, ages 12 to 21. And so we played the Petrushka of Stravinsky, a very difficult and complicated piece, and the Symphonie Fantastique of Berlioz, a very challenging program, but there was no audience except themselves. They all clapped themselves roundly. But what we did do is we live streamed the concert. And then a very beautiful thing happened, which is that one of the teachers of one of the kids in the orchestra was watching on the live stream, and we had the words underneath on the bottom of the screen so that they could follow the story. And she was watching with her 10-year-old daughter. And the first piece was Petrushka. So the whole story of Petrushka with the ballet ballerina and the Moor and so on, this very complex music. She started rooting for Petrushka to get the ballerina, whereas, of course, she goes off with the Moor. And her mother was very intrigued and said, why? And she said, well, I can see, obviously, they belong together. And then the mother, who was an English teacher, said, what is it about the music that suggests to my daughter that these two belong together? When I heard that, I suddenly had an enormous amount of time on my hands, because instead of being busy from morning to night, as I was before COVID came along, I suddenly had eons of time, and I settled down and I wrote a very elaborate analysis of Petrushka for a 10-year-old. And gave it to her in 4 parts, which you used to listen to 4 days in a row. And the last day, I did Poustics. I read Poustics, which is my favorite Proust story. And I sent that to her. And she watched it. And then they sent it out to all the other 10-year-olds in Sharon, which is where they come from. Now, suddenly, there's a huge opening for young children, of course, not just 10-year-olds, any age, to understand this complex modern work through the eyes of a 10-year-old. And I got a letter from somebody who's doing it in Israel, asked whether he could add a 6-year-old section because his son was 6 and loved the piece. Now, gradually it's spreading out. And one of the things you have to recognize is the incredible power and importance of Zoom. Because imagine this catastrophe without the connections which we've had. And I've had amazing opportunities. One of my former conducting students said, would I do a class on Zoom? I said, well, how can I do that? There's no orchestra. Well, never mind. He said he would arrange it. And we had the class, and it was just 2 people in the screen, the person conducting, and 274 conductors watching. And we had 5 classes like that. Fantastic events. Now, suddenly there's a whole community of conductors all around the world. So
let me interrupt you there for a sec, if I might, Ben.
Yeah.
So
it's difficult, isn't it?
we're talking about some of the synergy that occurred in all sorts of realms. We found this in talking to scientists and academics. that they had these unusual partnerships and collaborations with people around the world they could never have had without the COVID actually accelerating that process. And indeed, our own program has really survived because of Zoom, and it's escalated its reach. There are lots of people from around the world taking part now, which is lovely. So speaking of being able to pivot on a dime, one of the other things you did do was take the music to the people. So part of you providing some kind of solace, beauty, and pleasure to people was opening up your driveway for these Safe and Sound concerts, which you started doing, I think, in May and kept going till September. So we're going to listen to a little clip of one of those concerts now, if we might.
it was so beautiful because the musicians are great musicians. They're members of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra and great players. And they were so happy to play. And people came from far and wide. One of the concerts we had 200 people in my driveway. But what was also fascinating is we live streamed them. And then we got letters from Buenos Aires and from Peru and from Scandinavia and from all over the world, people watching. And this is the miracle of the modern technology, that suddenly we are in a village and can communicate with each other. And people were so grateful. They were grateful for any music. Of course, the ones who were there in person had a very powerful experience. One of the musicians, in the very first time she played, she burst into tears because she hadn't played with anybody for so long. And it is a necessity for a musician to do that, to make music, live music. And so that was the one place where live music could be found on Sunday afternoons in my driveway. And we called it Safe and Sound, and live in the drive. And that was a lovely thing. And it did more than just please the people who came. It transformed the neighborhood, because suddenly people came out of their houses and joined together and met each other and listened to the music and loved the music. And I met somebody today, I was walking along the street and somebody gave me a big, big smile, which was obviously a smile of gratitude because of those concerts. And we may go on doing them, although they're not necessary anymore, because fortunately now we're back in the concert hall and people can hear live music. And you asked the question, what is really the difference between hearing music, what we call canned music, artificial music, and hearing it live? And it's a mysterious thing, because nowadays the technology is so extraordinary that we can convince ourselves that we're listening to music at the same level, but it doesn't compare. The vibrations in the air, the immediacy of the sound is like the difference between eating fresh fruit or corn off the cob, which is just picked off the cob, and one which you get out of a can. It's just, however good the can is, it's never as good. So the fact that people now, I think, appreciate what they had much more than they did, because the concert in Symphony Hall, our first, we've had 3 concerts already in Symphony Hall, and people say they couldn't believe what the beauty of the sound and how happy they are to be in concerts, whereas before I think we took it for granted. And that's one of the advantages of a bad situation, is that you appreciate the good much more. So
well, there's also, I think, an emotional connection. It's impossible to kind of calibrate that, but there's a synergy in the same way you go to live theatre. There's a connection that you take that with you somehow. It kind of injects you with joy somehow.
Right.
And I don't know what it's like as a conductor. I can't imagine if you pull all that from the whole hall. I can't imagine. As well as the players.
It is wonderful. It's a wonderful experience. But I would love to share what happened with my youth orchestra, because we were really stumped. We could not play. Many people tried to do kind of find solutions with Zoom, where one person was playing one place and the other, but we didn't manage to do it. Some people managed that very well, and there was some successful examples of it, but you can't really make music with somebody if they're not there. And so what came up for us was really beautiful. I said to the orchestra, there are 100 people in the youth orchestra. Many of them were not in Boston, of course, because they didn't come back to school. And I said, the one thing you can do is to be a conductor, because as we know, the conductor is the only musician who doesn't make a sound, right? He is powerful, but his power comes from his ability to make the musicians powerful. So that's a very different role and has to be learned. It's a leadership role. And so what I did was I said to them, let's spend this year learning to be a conductor, not in order to be a conductor, but in order to see music and life as if you were responsible for the whole. And they took this on in a very deep and profound way. We met every Saturday afternoon on Zoom, and we studied in depth many aspects of musical interpretation and instrumentation, and they became interested in other instruments. The cellists interested in the flutes, and the trombonists interested in the piccolo. It was really amazing. And then we studied one piece in great depth, which was Mahler's Fourth Symphony, and they all had a score, of conductor score, which was sent to them to their homes. One of them lived in Korea and was watching this class at 2:30 in the morning. I remember saying to her, I said, Amy, you're going to be listening to this at 2:30 in the morning. She said, I do not consider that to be a problem. Anyway, these young musicians threw themselves into the idea of being a conductor, including the kind of human development and mastery of leadership that is necessary in order to be a conductor. They all trained in that way for a year. We had 26 classes. And then something very extraordinary happened. We came back together in this fall, and we went on. We can continue, although they were all in the room together. And the piece we studied was the Mahler's Fourth Symphony. Now, they'd already been deeply into it in a way that orchestra players almost never do, and become engaged with it in a way that was very profound. And I think they played on a level of awareness, of understanding, of caring, of love, of engagement that they had no access to before. So that was a profound experience that could not have happened if it hadn't been for COVID. And so I'm fascinated by what it was that we all came up with that couldn't have happened if it hadn't been for that catastrophe. And not to minimize the catastrophe, but
we actually did a program about the positive things that came out of the pandemic.
Really? Yeah,
yes, because I think there is a tendency to, as you said, dwell on all the awful things. And of course, nobody's minimizing them. But there were many things that happened and could never have happened without that impetus. The arts had to pivot and imagine things in different ways. Science had to go on under extreme duress, producing things. The vaccine was produced in record time. So there were lots of things that were really accelerated. And, some of the habits that we adopted, hopefully will stay.
That would be a wonderful thing if we could keep, for instance, I was reading the wonderful organization that was sent out their thing, Windsor Music. They sent out their thing this morning, and they showed the musicians playing in the vaccination lines, and then giving lessons to the people who are on the front line medically, many of whom learn instruments. I mean, brilliant and generous and warm-hearted things that we wouldn't do in the normal run of life because we're so busy and we're so pressured, and there's so much competition to get attention. And in this case, it's no longer become part of that. It's really how much can we contribute? So the world of possibility is flourishing here, and all the arrows going out in all directions. It's a very exciting time to be alive, really very exciting. I'm enjoying my life as much as I ever have, if not more. And I say that against a background of terrible, terrible suffering. But it's even in hospital, I had a terrial fall, and I was.
Yes, tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I fell down the stairs in my own in the back garden, and lay on the ground for about 20 minutes in the rain, unable to move. I mean, it was a terrible thing. But it was so funny because when I finally pulled myself into the house and pulled myself up to get the telephone and called the ambulance, when they put me in the ambulance, the lead guy on the ambulance said, "Oh, I loved your concert in your driveway." So it would already become part of the community. Anyway, I was in that hospital a long time, and rehabilitation. I renamed it the Recapitulation Center because I wanted to go back. I didn't want to go downhill. And because I did a lot of exercise, I'm back at least to where I was before, and I think actually a little better. But the main thing was there was a lot of laughter because I discovered that pain and happiness have nothing to do with each other. You can laugh and be happy and still be in pain and still be in a difficult situation. And that was a very novel idea. The nurses started hanging around in my room because it was so much fun and there was so much laughter. So I think you can bring possibility anywhere. And that's the secret. I mean, to realize that there's no situation that is so bad that it's not open to possibility. And no situation that's so good that it's not vulnerable to the downward spiral.
Very good point. So I'm going to remind people that they are free to type in their questions for Ben. Please feel free to use the Q&A there. So I was struck by quite a few things. I watched several of your lectures, which I have to say are amazing. And you mentioned at one point this Harvard study, which showed how unhappy musicians in classical orchestras traditionally are, but not chamber groups, which I'm sure you're going to explain. They were only one notch above prison guards in terms of unhappiness.
Actually below prison guards.
Oh, below prison guards. Oh, God,
just below prison guards, they came out.
So so that's one point. And the second, which is talking about what you just raised, this idea of bringing joy anywhere. Our last forum was quite a remarkable program with Chris Hedges talking about teaching in prison. And then we had one of the long-term inmates who fortunately had survived and got a degree in New Jersey in jail. But anyway, it immediately made me want to beam you and these programs into every prison and juvenile detention center in the country. And I wondered, have you ever lectured in prison?
Yes, I gave a remarkable event in a maximum security prison where most of the inmates had been there for 30 years and were obviously serious criminals. And we did a 2-hour possibility event, and we sang Beethoven's Ninth in German, and we did the whole thing, and it was fantastic. One of the key parts of the possibility model is the giving of the A. I used to give my students.
Oh yes, the A in advance.
At the New England Conservatory, I gave the A in advance before they'd done anything, and they had to write a letter in the first 2 weeks of the year, which was dated May of the following year. And then they would write about who they would become, who they would be if only the voice in their head would stop telling them they couldn't do it. And then the person I would teach would be the person they had described. So I only take A students, including these prisoners in the prison. And they were, of course, what grade have they been given generally in their life is an F, right? Suddenly, 2 hours they were given an A, and their gratitude and their joy and their relief was just absolutely extraordinary. And, you know, a very lovely thing happened at the end. There were 150 of them in the room. And at the end, I said, would anybody like a copy of the book? And everybody put up their hand. And so I bought at $10 each, I think it was, 150 books to give out to them all, to send to them. And when the bill came, because I told the publisher, Penguin, what I was doing, they sent a bill charging 59 cents for each book. Now, that's how possibility works. In other words, I was in a prison. The guys in the prison were asking for possibility. I decided to buy it, and the bill came at 59 cents instead of $10. I mean, that's how it works. When I talk about the little miracles that happen every day, they really do happen every day. In this world of possibility, people pick it up. And the secret is, the key is the eyes, because if the eyes are shining, then you know people are in possibility. And if the eyes are not shining, you don't blame the other person. You simply say, who am I being that my children's eyes are not shining, or my players' eyes are not shining? So I have all sorts of strategies for creating shining eyes, including giving the members of the orchestra a white sheet of paper on their stand in which they can say anything that they wish, in order, including complaining about my conducting, or complaining about the tempo, or whatever it is that they normally complain about with each other in the cafeteria. Here they can actually say it out loud in the white sheet, and I just got a lovely little white sheet on Saturday, because I do it with the kids too, the children. And one of them wrote, "Thank you for your excitement and passion every week and every rehearsal. It uplifts us all." Oh. And I think it's very important to think this way. This is not personal excitement and personal passion. This is something that's available to everybody, like electricity. And the thing is, you have to know where the socket is to put the plug. So if you think of possibilities being the socket, then you have to take the plug and put it in that socket, and then the lights go on. Or as this young man says, the excitement and the passion every week. So what is beautiful to realize is that the lady who I met walking through the street, the wonderful Sheila with her dog Wally, she said, we walked off, she wrote me this morning, she said, we walked off with a spring in our step. Now that was not my spring, that was the spring. Do you realize that was the common passion, excitement, energy, engagement, and love, which exists in the world, and we have to find the plug and put it in the socket, and the socket is possibility.
Somebody's just wrote a nice note in. Judith has said the Sarasa Chamber Group offers classical concerts to incarcerated teens, and they speak of how amazed the teens were to hear this music for the first time. That brings me to an important point. We'll go back to the unhappy musicians in a moment. Have you ever encountered anybody, because you don't allow this into your realm of possibility, that doesn't like classical music?
Well, I have this rather cheeky theory, and I have a TED talk based on it, which incidentally has been seen by 22 million people apparently, or 22 million views, I should say. My thesis is that everybody loves classical music. They just haven't found out about it yet. And so I have never yet found anybody who didn't respond. And it's a very funny thing that everybody responds if you point it out, if you take them through it. Now, they don't do it on their own. You have to help them. But I was giving one of my talks, which I did a lot of things. I used to do lots and lots of talks to corporate groups. And one day I was talking to a group of school administrators in England, in Newcastle. And I know you know England, so you know what kind of setting that would be. And there were 500 of them. And I gave my usual talk and full of stories and energy and singing and happy birthday and all this thing. And everybody was responding, and there were shining eyes everywhere, except one person didn't respond. Nothing, didn't move, face completely set. And all the way through, and of course, where I'm a human being, where did my eyes keep going? Always to that man, because he was the one. There were 499 people responding with joy and enthusiasm, not this man. And so when it was over, I called Roz in Cambridge, and she said, "How did it go?" And I said, "Well, it was great, but of course," I said, "there was one person who didn't respond." And she said, "I don't believe it." I said, "Roz, he didn't respond. There was nothing. There was no reaction." And she said, "I don't believe it." I said, "Roz, you weren't there. How could you possibly?" Well, that night there was a party and he was there. And I went up to him and I said, "I'm having an argument with my wife about you because I say you didn't respond this afternoon." And she said she didn't believe me. And he said, "I'm so sorry. I was having a diabetic attack.
Oh.
And I thought if I moved, I would faint. I loved the presentation and the music was fantastic." So I use that as an example of there is nobody who doesn't respond, but I can't prove it, but I can say it. And it's a statement. It's a possibility to live into. I live into the possibility that everybody wants to hear music, and I do everything I can. The website I'm about to launch a new website with explanations of the music for everybody, and I just feel we've got to musicate the world.
Musicate. Okay, so two things. We never got back to the unhappy musicians.
Right.
And is that the fault of the conductor or the way that they
It's
taught?
the fault of the system. And
Mhm.
incidentally, it's already changing because when that study was done, 1995, things were a lot worse than they are now. But there's still the dominating figure of the conductor, the top-down hierarchical male leader. And when the book came out in 2000, that was the model for leadership around the world of corporations everywhere. The domination of the leader. What we have shown in our book and in our work is that leadership is not about domination, it's about relationship. And so the relationship that is created between the leader, whether it's the teacher or the political leader or the conductor or whoever it is, that is what's crucial. It's the eye to eye relationship. So I've done everything I can with all sorts of strategies to minimize the hierarchy and to bring the eye to eye contact between the members of the orchestra. And for instance, by asking their opinion, by giving them a voice, by being influenced by what they want, because after all, they're the ones who are playing the music. And if they have a white sheet of paper and they can say, Ben, I think that if you were to give me a little bit more time at the top of that phrase, I gave whatever they ask, they can ask. And one person wrote, can we have some more light back here? I mean, even they know that they have a voice, and that changes very much. And I don't hesitate to ask their opinions. I mean, there's extraordinary musicians amongst those players. And even the children, that's what's so wonderful. Even the youngsters have, and of course, it develops their ability to write, and it gives them strength, and it develops their self-morale and all those things. So anything that we as leaders can do to empower the people we're leading to be as expressive and as powerful and as fully engaged as possible, that will diminish that upset that the players lived under and people lived under throughout society.
Okay, I've got a couple of things to interject with here. They're disparate, so I hope you can hold these two different thoughts. One is how much perhaps has been influenced by having more women conductors coming into the field, because not completely, but women tend in their leadership style to be more inclusive.
Right.
They found this in governments and other.
Right. I've got a very clear answer to that. Corporations that I talk to that are led by women are very much more advanced than ones led in general by men. There are not enough women conductors yet to be able to say what influence they've had. The fact that there are so many of them and so many of them are good is a great development, because when I started out, there were none. I mean, Nadia Boulanger, there were people like that. But now it's become, in the corporate world, I was involved in a conversation, a beautiful conversation once. There was Merrill Lynch, and they were discussing how they could be the best in the world. Well, that's the typical conversation of the downward spiral, winning, losing, success, failure, and therefore measurement and comparison, right? And they were discussing that. And then one of the women leaders, I think she was a vice president, she said, instead of discussing how we can be the best in the world, why don't we discuss how we can be the best for the world? And suddenly the conversation shifted. Now we were in contribution. And that shift is a shift that I think human beings are in the process of making. Unfortunately, we're not all making it together. Unfortunately, there's a whole part of the human species that seems to want to go backwards towards domination. And they're making a huge mistake, because they're losing out on the energy and the capacity, the imagination, creativity, and spontaneity of the people they're leading. And that I think the future is with those who can unleash the power and the really the spiritual power as well as the energy of
I
the
was
people
about
they're
to
leading.
bring that word up actually, Ben, because when I was writing this earlier and I was thinking about what you do, you know, you open your garden to strangers, you have a sign there saying, if you like the front, come around the back, it's even prettier, or whatever the sign
Yeah,
says.
I say,
And you give away your
yeah,
music.
more beauty in the back. Please peek, I say. People
And then,
come, yeah.
and then you give away music for free at these wonderful recitals in your driveway, and you seem to open your heart almost unconditionally. So is this something you had to learn, Ben, or it's not something you seem to hear at the Harvard Business School being
No,
taught?
no,
You
that's
give
right.
talks to these Fortune 500 people. So how do you tell these people in power and wealth and fame that these other things matter? How do you
Right.
kind of get their
Right.
attention?
Well, I tell you, I have a fantastically powerful tool, which is music. And I bring music into the room. I get them to sing and I tell them about music and I play it on the piano. And gradually their shackles fall off and their emotional pores open, and they cannot resist the power of Chopin and of Mozart and of Beethoven and of that great music. And suddenly they're open-hearted, they're singing with each other, and they realize that a power is opening up in themselves, which they do not normally get access to. And that is the gift that we artists have to give to the business world. We always think of the business world as being important for giving money, but money is very nice. But what we give, which is essentially the art of possibility, the idea that we are connected, inclusive, and that we are living in contribution. That is what we do. And that is such a powerful message and so beautiful and opens people up in ways that so often they don't suspect. They become so much more lovely and so much
But
more.
it seems like you give them permission to be human.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
that's really
Exactly.
what it seems to be. And
Yeah.
then they must jump at it
Yes.
because, you
Yeah.
know, they're not being measured, they're not being evaluated, there's no
Right.
charts. They're just being able to express and receive.
Yes, I'd love to tell a very lovely, it's a Roz story. Roz is my partner. The paintings that people can see behind my head are all Roz's paintings. She's a wonderful painter and she's a writer. She's a family therapist. And I had a wonderful learning experience with her, which I'd like to share. I taught at the Walnut Hill School. It's a wonderful school for the performing arts in Natick, and I was in charge of the music program. And the musicians, the seniors and the juniors, came every year, 4 times a year, to the Boston Philharmonic concerts, sat in the balcony, 60 of them. And one day we had one of the most exciting concerts we've ever had because I persuaded my favorite violinist in the world, Ivry Gittler, some of your listeners will know who that is. He had agreed to come and play. He was 78, he'd never been in Boston, and it was big news. People came from New York, a couple came in from Oklahoma just to hear him, and they couldn't get in because it was sold out. I mean, it was that exciting. Came out to conduct the first piece on the program, and every seat was taken. And I looked up in the balcony, and goodness me, 30 empty seats. And of course, I knew immediately it was the kids from the school. And I was livid. You know, they were missing this great event. It turned out they'd gone to the mall. They'd gone shopping. Yeah, exactly. Your shock on your face. I mean, it's just, it couldn't be. So the next day I'm driving to school to give the class at the Walnut Hill School. And I'm talking to Roz on the phone, and I tell her, these stupid kids, they didn't go to the concert and they're completely irresponsible. And she said very quietly, remember to apologize. I said, what do you mean apologize? Why should I apologize? They had tickets. They knew they were keeping other people away. It was and ranting again. She said again, Ben, remember to apologize. I had no idea what she was talking about. And then I was driving along thinking, apologize. And then it suddenly occurred to me what she meant. And I walked into the class and I said, I am so sorry. I didn't tell you about this violinist. I didn't tell you that the sound of his violin, just hearing him play, would transform your relationship to music for the rest of your life. I didn't tell you, so I didn't enroll you. I'm so sorry I let us all down. And so I say, if people don't do what you want them to do, you can apologize to them because you didn't enroll them. That's very different from blame and fault and threat, which is what we do in the downward spiral. So I said that, as I often did, told that story at a corporate talk. I can't remember where it was, 1,500 people in the room. And that night I was having dinner in the restaurant alone. And a woman came up to me and she said, "You saved my marriage today." I said, "What?" She said, "My husband is moving out of our house after 23 years of marriage. While I'm at this conference, the moving truck is outside the house." And when I heard that story, I ran upstairs and I called him and I said, "Please don't leave. I apologize." And he told the truck to leave. Welcome to the world of possibility.
Wow.
Now there's a mysterious quality to possibility. You know, we know what we know what we don't know, but we don't know what we don't know that we don't know. You know, that's the realm in which we're living. And I can see you, we're on the radio, but we're also on view. I can see your eyes are shining as they shine when we're in the conversation of possibility. And it's a beautiful thing to be able to share it with young people, with other musicians, with audiences, and with the corporate world, because the corporate world needs this deeply and desperately, because they are in the world in which wealth and fame and power are the only aims of not only themselves and their workers, but of their children and their families. Wealth and fame and power. And that leads to the downward spiral conversation. I am only interested in how many shining eyes there are around me. So that's the world of contribution. And that's an important choice.
Okay, so just being practical for one little tiny moment here, I can understand that you must be dealing in the youth orchestra with an awful lot of type A, anxious overachievers who probably have got a lot of hothousing of parenting, that, you know, success, achievement, pressure. So how do you balance that? How do you tell them to be their best and not feed into that sort of hyper anxious, hyperactive kind of state, which is so common amongst young people now? This pressure to succeed.
The answer is every week. We address it every week. It's partly the atmosphere in the room. It's partly the devotion to the music. It's partly because I give out assignments every week, assignments in being, and one week it'll be walk with spirit and love. Another week it'll be come from the power of a child. When we were in the competition mode, I said compete, but give up the necessity to win. You know?
That's a very good one.
We talk about these things all the time, and at least it's a place for 4 hours. We rehearse for 4 hours, even though the youngest kids are 12 years old. Their love of music, the sense of devotion. Some of them come from enormous distances. One 14-year-old comes up with his parents from New Jersey every week, 5 hours, and another from New York, and another from Jarriscotta, Maine, and they come in, and for 4 hours it's a devotional space, a space of contribution and love, and we move them around so they don't get attached to seats, you know, so that they don't get competitive. And we teach them, and of course during that period of COVID, when they were learning about other instruments and learning to listen for the other instruments, that's the thing about orchestral training. It's wonderful training in listening, because you're hearing very delicate and sophisticated and subtle things that are not normally heard by the normal human ear. So they develop all these skills, and skills of hard work and devotion, sitting for 4 hours on a Saturday afternoon and making music and playing this great music and understanding it and conveying the emotional range of a Tchaikovsky or a Shostakovich or Mahler or Brahms. It is a huge human training. And I think you put your finger on something very important, which is that competition, which is, of course, the downward spiral model, being better than, and of course, the people who are in that mode are always looking over their shoulder, worrying that somebody else is doing better. And that is the downward spiral leads to dis-ease, which is why we call it disease. So what we create is there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of storytelling, there's a lot of assignments. There's plenty to give them a sense that they're in a different world. And that's how we deal with it. And we deal with it one group at a time. You can't change the world easily, but you keep doing it. Keep doing it.
So you talk about two things that are very important. One is the shining eyes, which is a lovely idea, but also vision, the having a vision. And one of the things that you say at the Philharmonic is if you have return tickets, that you give them to Rosie's place.
Yes, so or to any homeless shelters, because
that's wonderful.
Well, our vision, every effective organization has to have a vision. And our vision at the Boston Philharmonic is passionate music making without boundaries. That tells us how to behave, tells us what to do, because if passionate music making is what we do, then we play with passion and we approach music with passion. And I give a pre-concert talk to every concert so that people will understand the music and experience it as passion. And then we say without boundaries. And so if there are boundaries, we knock them down. And so we started giving tickets to people who came from homeless shelters, and they love music just as much as everybody else.
Yes,
and
yes.
And they're just as overwhelmed by it. And so, yes, it creates a whole environment in which giving, well, it's the name of this game that we're playing is called the game of contribution. And the reward is the shining eyes. The money and the fame and all the other stuff that are so much part of the downward spiral, that comes by the way. You know, if you give this away on a large enough scale, for instance, I have a series of interpretation classes now, which are just me coaching music to young musicians, and they've gone online, and some of them have been seen by 700,000 people. Well, that means that if I travel somewhere, I'm likely to run into people who've seen those things. And the feeling of joy and the feeling of gratitude is just so palpable. Who needs money? I mean, money is very nice, but I do it for nothing. I absolutely, I make the corporations pay, but not the musicians. No, that's an act of love. That's such a joyful exchange of experience. And I'm coming on 83 now. I'm hoping to have another good 10 years, you know. Let's see. I recommend the 80s, incidentally, to your listeners. The 80s are fantastic because you're liberated from a lot of nonsense.
So just getting real for a moment here, obviously we can't diminish the scale of some of the problems that we're trying to kind of face right now. And you said music, nature, and community are the best elements in life. You said that earlier. And I was wondering about how we fix the planet with this message, because I just saw the new musical at the ART.
Yes, I was there.
Which is called Wild.
Yeah.
And it's all about the climate crisis, but it seems to incorporate all those three ingredients. There's music, love of nature, and the sense of community are all absolutely essential to the plot. So you weren't moonlighting over there, were you, Ben, when they were?
No,
they were writing this.
I was just sitting having a wonderful time. No,
so have you seen it?
I was there. Yeah, I was there on the first night. Yeah.
Oh, same as me.
The thing, the climate situation is a catastrophe of greater proportions than anything human beings have ever faced, and we may not win it. But my God, people are trying. The whole younger generation has been transformed. Not so much the older generation, but the younger generation is spectacular, and what they're doing, and the ingenuity. And I have a feeling that I have no easy, hopeful answers there, and to be a Pangloss around that subject is irritating, because it's a very serious situation. But we've got the best minds and the best energies working on that. Rose, for instance, I mean, that's what her whole life has been about, and her husband, Hans-Jörg Wies, is an extraordinary man, and donating staggering amounts of money and resources for the environment. He's bought up land on a staggering scale to preserve it for conservation. And that's, everybody seems to, well, I shouldn't say everybody, but really lots of responsible people have thrown themselves into that. And sometimes we rightly get into total despair, and the way the Republican Party is behaving is so irresponsible and so detrimental. And I'm reading letters from my mother to her mother, which were written in 1938, 1939, 1940, when I was born. And it's shocking, the similarities of what she's writing to her mother about, and how frightened she is, and speeches of Hitler and things like that. And I think, good grief, this is... So don't let's end on that note, because we all together, I mean, part of your program is there precisely for that reason, to counteract the villainy that human beings are attracted to for some reason. But there are no shining eyes in that department, and our job is to convince the young people, particularly, that there is another path, and there's always a pathway to possibility, always.
Well, that's a thrilling and very positive note to end on, and I think it's true. I think it's true. They have the most to lose, and therefore they're fighting the hardest, because they want to have a better planet for the next generation. Hopefully there will be another generation. So music, meanwhile, provides enormous solace and joy to us all. So I thank you for all your work, Ben. You're really inspirational. And I think the love you spread around by the way you live is an example to us all. You probably never thought of yourself as some sort of spiritual guru, but this is pretty powerful stuff. If enough people do it, it's pretty powerful.
Well, I don't, that's a very good point. I don't think of this as personal. I think it's available to us. And I think I'm a very good vicar, but people go to the church to see the vicar. There's something much bigger there. And I am a good vicar, and I love the fact that I can do this and can get more and more people, the 22 million people who've seen that TED Talk. I'm very happy about that. But it's Chopin they came to see, and what Beethoven had to say, and what those great visionaries have seen. And so I think we just have, and don't think that it's lessening, it's growing and growing and growing. We ain't seen nothing yet. I think the availability of classical music throughout the world on all these machines is just spectacular, and more people are listening. So we ain't seen nothing yet. We're on the way.
Well, believe it or not, the hour has flown by. So I want to thank you, Ben, for such a wonderful conversation. Hopefully you've inspired people to go check out your TED Talks, which are fascinating, or to get a copy of the book, which, believe me, is a worth
in 22 languages. 22 languages. And do we have time? Yeah, 22 languages. And I'll tell you one last thing about that book. When Chavez went to see, when Uribe went to see Chavez, they were having conflict between Venezuela and Colombia. He went to the border to meet, to see whether they could resolve the difficulty. He took only one thing with him, which was l'arte de possibilità, The art of possibility is a gift from the president of Colombia to the president of Venezuela. And they called up from the radio station one morning at 7 o'clock and said, "Would you have a comment?"
Thank you. That's wonderful. Okay, well, I can't top that story at all, Ben. I wouldn't even try. Yeah. But I would like to thank you and everybody that chimed in today and watched this. Cambridge Forum is made possible by the generosity of Herbert and Dorothy Vetter, the Lowell Institute, the Mass Cultural Council, and Cambridge Community Foundation. And of course, you. So you can step up and donate via our website, www.cambridgeforum.org. And you'll find other podcasts of all our other programs, links to the new.
And can I say one thing? Can I say one thing? This is the time of donations. Be more generous than you think you have the resources for.